Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the True Crime Cocktail Hour, your weekly therapy session. The week is done, was about damn time, and the weekend is knocking on our doors. And that means it's time to sit down, relax, have a drink if you want. And since you're already here, let's do what we do best, shall we? Talk about a mysterious true crime case. On today's episode of the True Crime Cocktail Hour, New York, 1999. It's time to move on and move out. After living in his house for 9 years, Ronald Cohen was ready for something new. And so he sold his house and started to pack up his things. Now, Ronald and the future owner of the house, they had agreed that the house would be handed over completely empty. Ronald didn't have that same agreement with the previous owner, and so he had all kinds of stuff lying around that didn't even belong to him. But now he had to get it out of the house. And one of those things was this heavy-ass fuck barrel down in the crawl space. And it's been down there like forever, like since the day Ronald moved in. And Ronald had always planned to like have it picked up or have it removed otherwise, but he always, put it off. And we can't really blame Ronald, We've all been there. Oh, I'm gonna clean out my closet next weekend, or I'm gonna tidy up my garage. And then you never end up doing it because, let's be honest, it just messes up your whole day. But now, Ronald, unfortunately, just had to. So Ronald called a friend, and together they pushed this heavy barrel out of the house onto the street, where the garbage collectors would come and pick it up in a couple of hours. But when Ronald went to check later, the barrel was still there. But the garbage collectors, they had left a note. Barrel way too heavy. Please contact a specialist company. And Ronald was like, ugh. For the love of God, can I get rid of this barrel or what? And here's the thing, Ronald, he got over $500,000 for his house. If I were him, I would just call a specialist company and have it picked up. Not Ronald, and thank God he did what he did. And even though there were numerous warning signs on this barrel, Ronald, after all, decided to open it up to see what the hell was inside. Maybe he can get rid of whatever is inside in a different way. And so Ronald opened up that barrel, not knowing that by opening this barrel, he would also open the files of a missing persons case dated back 30 years. This is the True Crime Cocktail Hour, and this is the mysterious case of the lady in the barrel. So when Ronald opened up the lid of the barrel, a disgusting stench rose to his nose. And at first glance, it wasn't really clear where the smell was coming from, because the whole barrel was filled with numerous plastic pellets. But when he took a closer look, he spotted a shoe and what looked like a white, lifeless hand protruding from between the pellets. And Robert was like, fuck that, no. So he let go of the lid. He wouldn't touch that barrel again. But he knew exactly what he had to do, and so he called 911. The autopsy revealed that the body inside was that of a woman in her late 20s or early 30s. She had dark, sun-kissed skin, dark, very long hair, and she had gold up on her front teeth, which was very unusual for New York at the time, but you could see it more frequently in the southern regions like Central America. Her clothes were also not that from the 90s, but more like from the 60s or 70s. However, that would mean that this woman was inside that barrel for almost 30 years. It was concluded that the woman died of blunt force trauma, so it was indeed a homicide. And the saddest findings of all was that the woman was 9 months pregnant. But they also found a couple of other things inside of that barrel. They found jewelry, which probably belonged to that woman, also a green plastic rose for whatever reason, and an address book. But this address book was very decomposed from moisture, and even though hope was almost non-existential, they at least wanted to try to restore the address book to an extent that you could at least decipher something from it, because at that point they had no other way of finding out who this woman was. They were not able to identify her even after the autopsy, and so the address book could at least be a first clue. But restoring this address book would take ages. In the meantime, however, the barrel was the thing that gave investigators the first clue. Because first of all, it was heavy as fuck. You couldn't just get it anywhere without being seen, and even if you had help, it would take for fucking ever and probably raise an eyebrow or two. So it was assumed that the place where the barrel was found, the house, was also the place where the woman was indeed murdered. Furthermore, investigators found a well-preserved mark on the barrel, and it showed that this very barrel was delivered to a company called Melrose Plastics in 1967 and was originally used to transport paint. The Melrose Plastics company was a company that produced plastic flowers back in the days, and so the green plastic rose they found inside the barrel would also fit in with this. And also around that time, forensic experts were actually able to restore the address book to an extent where they could decipher at least some telephone numbers, names, and addresses. They also found a note written by the victim herself, probably, and this note was very, very interesting because it said, quote, "Don't be mad, I told the truth," end quote. So during the next couple of days, investigators called every single phone number the forensic experts were able to decipher from the address book. But remember, those phone numbers were also 30 years old, so hopes were very, very slim. But they were lucky with one number, and this number belonged to a woman called Kathy Andrade. And she told investigators that, yes, indeed, a very good friend of hers had disappeared without a trace 30 years ago. And the name of this woman was Reina Angelica Marroquin. Reina was originally from Salvador but came to the United States in early 1966 to start a new life after her divorce. She met Kathy Andrade in an English course and the two became really good friends. And shortly afterwards, Reina even landed a job at a nearby company. It was not exactly her dream job, something that she enjoyed doing, but it was at least something. Interestingly, the company where she started was called Melrose Plastics. So Reina already had a son from her first marriage, but then one day she went over to Kathy and she told her that she was pregnant again and that the father of her child was one of the owners of Melrose Plastics. And she told Kathy, it's going to be fine. I know we're not married, but this man, he promised me that he was going to marry me and raise this child together. However, Kathy was wondering about this because she knew the man Reina was talking about. And so her response wasn't exactly what Reina had hoped for, because Kathy was like, "No, doll, I'm sorry, he is already married and he's got 3 children with his wife. He's not gonna leave his family for you, sweetheart." Reina apparently had no clue about this, and she was devastated and heartbroken over these news, and she wanted to talk to her unborn child's father immediately, and so she called him at home. Unfortunately, he was not the one to pick up the phone, but his wife did. So Reina ended up telling this woman the entire truth, and that was unfortunately the last time Kathy would see her friend. So Kathy, unfortunately, she couldn't really remember the man's name, and so investigators, they went over to Melrose Plastics and they found an employee who had been there forever, and they asked him if he had an idea who this man could be. And indeed, this employee, he remembered that scandal that was going on in the company 30 years ago, in which one of the bosses had an extramarital affair with a young Hispanic woman. And this man's name, Howard Elkins. One of the names found in the address book was Howard Elkins. And guess who was the previous owner of Ronald Cohen's house? Howard Elkins. So I guess that's enough evidence to pay this man a visit and see what he has to say. So this man, Howard Elkins, he had moved to Florida a couple of years back together with his wife, and they were living in this retirement home. And when Howard Elkins opened up the door to the police, he wasn't really surprised, and he was nice, he was just chatting with them. But when they told him why they were here, that they had found Reina and confronted him with all the evidence they had, he became increasingly angry and very uncooperative. So for example, when they went and asked him for a DNA sample so they could compare it to the DNA of the unborn child, Howard refused. Despite investigators were super certain that he was the man they were looking for. And so investigators were like, "Okay, Howard, we can also do it the hard way. We'll be back here tomorrow this time with a warrant, and it will force you to give us that DNA sample. We'll compare it to the DNA of the unborn child, and it will tell us that you are the father of this baby. And once we got that, we'll be back here again, this time to arrest you for murder." And Howard just looked at them. He just nodded and closed the door. So the investigators, they just drove off. There was nothing else they could do, but still, it would later turn out that this was actually a huge mistake, because Howard also got in his car once they were gone, and he drove to the nearest Walmart. He bought a gun and ammunition, and for a German, that's just crazy that you guys can just go into a fucking Walmart and buy a gun there. That's incredible. However, that's exactly what Howard did. And when he got back, he snuck into his neighbor's garage and he killed himself with a well-aimed shot to the head. He didn't leave a suicide note. And indeed, DNA analysis would later show that this coward was indeed the father of Raina's baby. That, my dear children, was the story of the lady in the barrel. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It just shows me that you enjoy what I do somewhat, and really every time. It really makes my day. Other than that, what's left to say is I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead of you. Try to relax a little bit, and if you don't have any plans next Friday, why don't you meet me here for another cocktail and, of course, another mysterious true crime case.